say if we want to graph 3 cosine 1/3 x. So the amplitude is 3, the period is 3 pi divided by 1/3, so that's 3 pi times 3, that's 9 pi. So we have a vertical stretch of 3 and a horizontal stretch of 3 as well at the same time. So we know cosine starts at the top. So let's say this is 3 and that's -3. And that's one cycle. If we wish to continue it, that's another cycle. So from here to here is one cycle. So this is 9 pi. And that's how you would graph 3 cosine 1/3 x. So now let's introduce the vertical shift. And then we're going to introduce the phase shift. So now let's say if we have y equals sine x plus 2. The 2 is the vertical shift. So what you should do is first plot 2, which is going to be your center line. Your amplitude is 1, so you need to go up 1 from 2, which is 3, and down 1, which is 1. So sine starts at the center. It's going to go up, back to the center, and then down, back to the center. And that's how you graph it. So let's say if you want to graph 3 sine x plus 4. So the vertical shift is 4. So let's plot that first. And the amplitude is 3. So 4 plus 3 is 7. And 4 minus 3 is 1. So we need to go up to 7 and stop at 1. Or the lowest we can go is 1. So plot the midline, which is where the vertical shift is. And let's make this -3 sine plus 4x. It won't change these numbers. That's going to be the same. But instead of going up, we're going to go down, back to the center, and then up. Okay, so let's say if we want to graph y is equal to 2 sine 4x minus 3. So let's start with the midline. The vertical shift is -3. And amplitude is 2. So -3 plus 2 is -1. That's our maximum. And -3 minus 2 is -5. That is our minimum. And we have a positive sine graph. The period is 2 pi over b, or 2 pi over 4, which is pi over 2. So we're going to start here. And let's plot the period. So let's say pi over 2 is somewhere over here. What we need is 4 points. Half of that is pi over 4, and half of that is pi over 8. And 3 times pi over 8 is 3 pi over 8. So those are the 4 important points that we need. So here's the first one. It's going to, positive sign is going to go up, back to the middle, and then down, back to the center. And so that's our graph. That's one cycle for it. Okay, let's try one with cosine. So let's say y is -3 cosine 1/2 x plus 5. So let's plot the midline first. Let's go up 3 to 8 and down 3 to 2. Let's calculate the period. It's 2 pi over b, or 2 pi divided by half, so it's 4 pi. So let's say 4 pi is over here. Half of that is 2 pi, half of that is 1 pi. Times that by 3, you get 3 pi. So those are the 4 important points that we need. Cosine starts at the bottom, so which is at 2. Then it's going to go back to the center, and then to the top, back to the center, and at the bottom. So it's going to look like this. So that's how we can graph that function. So now let's introduce the vertical shift. If y is equal to 2 sine x minus pi over 2 plus 3. Okay, so let's make the graph. We can see that the vertical shift is up 3 and the amplitude is 2. So 3 plus 2 is 5 and 3 minus 2 is 1. So let's draw the horizontal line here. Now our phase shift, to find it, set the inside equal to 0 and solve for x. So it's going to be pi over 2. Next, let's calculate the period. The period is 2 pi over b, and the number in front of x, which there is no number, and it's an invisible 1, so it's 2 pi over 1, which is just 2 pi. Now what you need to do is add 2 pi to where you start from to get your endpoint. So pi over 2 plus 2 pi. 2 pi is the same as 4 pi over 2. And 4 pi over 2 plus pi over 2 gives you 5 pi over 2. So this graph is going to end. Let's extend it. It's going to end at 5 pi over 2. Now what you need is 5 points. You want to break it into 4 intervals. The midpoint between 1 pi over 2 and 5 pi over 2, between 1 and 5 is 3. And between 1 and 3 is 2. 2 pi over 2 is the same as pi. Between 3 and 5 is 4. 4 pi over 2 is the same as 2 pi, if you reduce it. So now we have our 5 points. So now you want to plot it. Sine starts at the center, and because it's positive 2, it's going to go up to 5. Then it's going to go back to the middle, down to 1, and then back to the middle. And so that's how you can graph one cycle. And if you want to, you can continue it if you want. Let's try another example. So let's say if we wish to graph y equals 3 cosine 1/2 x plus pi minus 5. So I'm going to draw the graph like this. So the vertical shift is at -5 and the amplitude is 3. So -5 plus 3, that's -2, that's my maximum. -5 minus 3 is -8, that's my minimum. By the way, if you want to find the range of this graph, as you can see, it's from low to high, -8 to -2. For the last one that we did, it varied from 1 to 5, so the range would be 1 to 5. The domain for sine graphs and cosine graphs is -infinity to infinity, because they can keep going on forever unless you restrict it. So I just want to mention that in case you had questions on it. So we talked about the amplitude already, it's 3. We considered the vertical shift. Now let's calculate the phase shift, where it starts. To find the phase shift, set the inside equal to 0 and solve for x. So if we move pi to the other side, 1/2 x is equal to -pi. And if we multiply both sides by 2, x is equal to -2 pi. Which I should have extended the graph here. So let me redraw it. Okay, so here's -5, -2, -8. So here's -2 pi. And here is our midline. And I'm just going to rewrite the equation. So now that we have the phase shift, this is where the graph is going to start. Let's calculate the period. The period is 2 pi over b, or just 2 pi divided by 1/2. And we're going to get 4 pi. Now what you should do is add your starting point, your phase shift, to your period. -2 pi plus 4 pi is equal to 2 pi. So that's where it's going to stop. So over here. So that's going to be just one cycle, and we can continue it if we choose to. So cosine starts at the top. So at negative 2 pi negative 2, which is right there, and it's going to go back to the middle. Well, first we got to break it into 4 intervals. The midpoint between negative 2 pi and 2 pi is 0, and between negative 2 pi and 0 it's negative pi, and between 0 and 2 pi it's pi. So then cosine is going to go back to the middle, which is going to be here at negative pi, and at 0 it's going to go to all the way to the bottom at negative 8, and at pi back to the center, and at 2 pi over it's going to be right there. It's going to look like that. Now be careful, don't draw a V shape. Now let's try one more example. So let's say if y is negative 2 sine 1/3 x minus pi over 2 plus 3. Okay, so most of the graph will be on the first quadrant, so I'm going to draw it like this. So let's start with the vertical shift. It's at 3, and the amplitude is 2. So 3 plus 2 is 5, 3 minus 2 is 1. That means that the range is from 1 to 5. And the domain goes on from negative infinity to infinity. So this is that's the midline. And next we need to find the phase shift. So set the inside equal to 0 and solve for x. So 1/3 x is equal to pi over 2, and if we multiply both sides by 3, x is 3 pi over 2. So that's where the graph is going to start. So now we need to calculate the period. The period is 2 pi divided by 1/3, which is the same as 2 pi times 3, so that's 6 pi. So we need to add 3 pi over 2, the phase shift, plus the period, which is 6 pi. 6 pi, if we get common denominators, is the same as 12 pi over 2. So 3 plus 12 is 15, so we get 15 pi over 2. So I'm going to extend this graph. So here's 15 pi over 2. The midpoint between 3 and 15 is, let's see, 3 plus 15 is 18. If you divide it by 2, you get 9. So it's 9 pi over 2. The midpoint between 3 and 9 is 6. 3 plus 9 is 12. Divided by 2 is 6. So we get 6 pi over 2, which reduces to 3 pi. And the midpoint between 9 and 15, and this doesn't look like a 15, but it's supposed to be 15. The midpoint between 9 and 15 is 12. So 12 pi over 2 reduces to 6 pi. So now we have our 5 points. And so now we can graph it. Sine starts at the center, and because it's negative sign, it's going to go down before it goes up. Then it's back at the center, then it goes to the top at 5, and then back to the middle. Now let's say if you only want to draw one cycle. Notice that your domain is restricted from 3 pi over 2 to 15 pi over 2. Based on the graph that we drew, because it starts here and it stops here. However, if you wish to continue the graph, it can go on forever. And the domain, therefore, can be negative infinity to infinity. So it really depends on whether if you choose to restrict your graph or if you choose to expand it. So just know that for sine waves, typically the domain is this, negative infinity to infinity, unless you put a restriction on it. And here's the range. So that's it for this video. That's how you can graph sine and cosine functions when you're given amplitude, vertical shift, phase shift, and if you're just given the equation. You know how to find everything now. So that's it, and thanks for watching.